All right, so we are going to start here with talking about turning on the lathe. This is going to be a part one lecture on how to do this. First off, I want to be very upfront. The lathe can be a very dangerous machine, so we want to make sure that we are using it correctly and understanding the parts and what's going to make the machine turn on and off and what's going to do the cutting. So pay attention as we go through here. Remember, on the lathe, it's the cut. It's not the cutter that's spinning. The cutter's stationary, but here the work pieces rotating. And in general, those work pieces can be fairly big chunks of steel or metal. So they are doing hundreds or thousands of revolutions per minute, depending on the lathe. So if anything were to break or fall out or come out of that chuck, you are basically hurtling that chuck of material at a high velocity, and it could be coming towards you, towards the wall, towards other parts of the machine, or towards any of your other classmates. So please make sure that you do have a good grip in the work holding method that we're using, and we're going to start out with smaller plastic pieces to get you familiar with it, but you do need to take precautions and be aware of what's going on with it. So ideally, understanding the risk that's there is a large portion of understanding the machine and the relationship between the machinist and the machine. So part of what we need to learn in this class is proper setup techniques, the tooling that you're going to be used. It's going to be able to kind of withstand and hold up to the forces, the heat, the vibrations that are taking place in the cutting action and the machine motion as well. So as I mentioned here, a competent machinist is familiar with the machine, knows the machine, and is sure of the actions before they're taking them. So as we go through, oftentimes I'm going to have you tell me what needs to occur or what you should be doing before you go and do it, just to help you make sure that you understand the motion and the action that you need to be performing there on the machine. So pay attention. I'll let you guys kind of read through this so that you understand more about the implications here of the machining process on a lathe. So we mentioned this in class. I'm mentioning it again. So there is a lot of danger behind the chips themselves, especially in what we call stringers or long continuous chips. So never grab one of those stringers. So make sure that the machine is stopped running if you need to get a stringer out of the way. As we kind of go through, we will try and attempt to get the chip to break. There are some times that you can't. But notice this tip: never reach for stringy chips with your hands or even with pliers. Use a chip hook made for the purpose. Now, chip hooks in and of themselves can also be dangerous. And I don't have any. I'm going to request that you turn the machine off. Depending on where you're working, some companies allow chip hooks. Other companies don't, because a chip hook can also get grabbed and pulled into the machine when it's running as well. So you also need to be very careful using chip hooks. So when you are on your machine, pay very close attention to how you are holding your work in the lathe. So don't pull any levers, push any buttons, or move any knobs until you are absolutely certain of what the action is going to happen. Pay attention to whether you are close to any of the other parts where you might crash into anything on these lathes as well. And also make sure that you know how to stop that lathe as well, just in case you need to be quick on the fly to get that machine turned off. So as we kind of go through this unit, you'll notice we are talking here about several different lathe operations. So we'll talk about straight turning, facing, drilling and reaming, turning angles, or what's referred to as taper turning. We'll talk about boring, forming different shapes, we'll talk about threading on a lathe, parting or cutting off, grooving, face grooving, knurling, and then hand finishing with files and sandpaper. So these are all the basic lathe operations that can be performed on a lathe. So as we take a look at it, so we're also going to go over the how the lathe works and the component parts that you need to be aware of. So you'll have to identify those. We're also going to be talking about the different work holding methods that could be possible or that will be used on a lathe as well. And then, of course, not just in this class, but in the cutting tools class, predominantly, we'll be going over all of the different types and sizes and shapes of your turning tools and what you need to be aware of there with those. So 10.5 in the textbook goes over lathe safety, so make sure that you cover and look through that, get some of the tips on chip control methods, using the guards on there, your basic potential danger that you could be faced as you're going through that. We'll talk about setting up and operating a lathe. This we're going to be doing in class while you're actually on there. So we'll go up, talk about how you calculate your speeds and feeds, your planning on your setup. Later on, we'll get into threading and measuring those threads here as well. So, all right, as you talk about basic lathe operation, understand that the motion control on a machine is required to basically provide the shapes that we need. So, and this kind of gives you a demonstration of what we're talking in terms of taper turning. Of course, we've got a thread up here. We've got some notches or grooves, both internal and external grooves. We've got the actual OD turning, and then we also have what is referred to as forming. Now, on a manual lathe, forming is done and accomplished by the tool bits that you're using. On a CNC machine, forming is controlled by the CNC controller itself. So, and that's kind of some of the differences here between a manual lathe versus a CNC lathe. And hopefully you will all get fairly well versed in both of these machine types. So this just gives you an example of how different cutting a thread on a manual lathe is going to be in terms of cutting a thread on a CNC machine as well. Now, you're going to, some of you will get to the chance where you will try to cut a thread on the manual lathe here in this class. The cutting a thread on a CNC machine comes in the next ENGT 250 class as well. So there are tons of videos on there that you can go through and watch if you'd like to watch that as far as how a lathe is actually cutting, and we will watch a couple of videos in here for that as well. So as you are talking about this, I'm going to be demonstrating several operations on the lathe, so make sure that you're paying attention as I demonstrate. So understand, for right now, we are basically using the lathe, whether it is our CNCs or the manual lathes themselves, we are using them as a manual type setting. So in MDI mode and the CNC machines as well. So some of the basic parts you'll need to know on the lathe: the headstock, tailstock, compound rest, carriage, the ways, the bed, chip pan, what we call a lead screw, the feed rod, a cross slide, and the tool post. I'll demonstrate and point those out on all of our machines so that you'll understand and be able to identify those as well. So we won't, of course, build a lathe, but it is kind of sometimes important for the machinist to understand mechanically how these things go together in assembly. So that's kind of showing you the difference between the saddle, your cross slide, the ways of the machine, your different clutch levers, what we call the apron as well. So again, as we talk about safety, the choices of the way you set up the machine is a large part of your safety here as well. So, and you have to be aware of that. So, of course, we need to make sure that we have the proper PPE, safety glasses, no long sleeves or long hair, hoodie strings, rings, jewelry, other items. Those can all get caught very quickly in the rotating spindle, and I'm not going to make any uh, qualms about that. That is generally the way fingers get lost, or people get seriously hurt. So make sure that nothing is hanging loosely from your body when you're operating a lathe, especially not on the manual lathes. When somebody else is on there, stay 6 feet away from the lathe. Don't distract them while they're running the lathe. If you need to ask them a question, wait patiently till they've shut the machine off, and then you can ask the question from there. So, again, the textbook talks about these 3 classes of danger. So, if something doesn't seem right, so then stop and pay attention to it. Class 2 is something is wrong. You can tell that real quick by noises or sounds coming from it. Again, stop what you're doing and check it out. And of course, the Class 3, the most dangerous of all, is an all-out crash. So make sure that you are not crashing that machine and are aware of how to stop that quickly. So we will talk more about how to calculate the RPM, and different limit codes on that. Certainly, safety features are an important part, depending on the size of the workpiece and the size of the cutting tools that we're using. So as we talk about our feed rates, likewise, we need to make sure that we are using the correct feed. Now, on a manual machine, you're going to be feeling that out as you more or less crank the dial. On the CNC machines, you can't really feel that out, so we'll have to use some common sense there. So, and of course, reference feed rates. There are several references on speeds and feeds. The Machinery's Handbook is there for that. Most of the time, your cutting tool manufacturers also give starting recommendations on speeds and feeds based on the material you're cutting and the type of material that the cutting tool is made out of. So some other chip control practices here. So make sure that you are using the chuck guard. In fact, most machines nowadays have interlocks with the chuck guard, so it won't start unless the chuck guard is in place. Don't stand in line with the chuck where the chips are flung out. Coolant helps, but that isn't always a good way to do it if that coolant's going to be flying out of the machine as well. We'll talk about the use of chip breakers. Again, the idea is that we want to make sure that we are using and trying to break that chip instead of getting stringers. And of course, never ever wear gloves around moving machinery, and especially not around rotating objects. So we'll talk about the best case scenario of work support. So, and the accessories that go along with the lathe to help support that workpiece. So, and again, when we talk about this, the safety, we can't emphasize safety enough. So make sure that your work holding is nice and tight, and you've got your work support all in place. Your tool holder and bits are not hanging out too far. Your speeds or feeds are within reason. So to exercise good safety on this. So in conclusion here for the first part on our lathe practices, keep in mind you are in control of the safety on the lathe. So I will be working through you and talking to you about that, observing you, also talking and letting you know good and bad practices on there. So we want to develop good safety practices as we start to learn how to machine on these lathes.